in this day and age, when it comes to understanding more about life and ourselves, we often turn to the lens of science for a deeper understanding of things that have been tried and tested over millennia. And now we're starting to take apart the underpinnings of our conscious experience and break them down into terms of neuroscience or biochemistry or just psychological terms. And in this process, there's a holistic approach that we have to take at the same time while we use the lens of science. So understanding that science is inherently reductionistic and at the same time can show us a lot about the way the world works. And today there's a lot of new exciting research being done on what's called cerebrospinal fluid. And this is essentially when you have a spinal tap or anything like that, it's the fluid that is central to the nervous system, essentially. And in cultures and traditions around the world, there is different practices that work on using this cerebrospinal fluid, and we use it all the time anyways in our daily lives. No matter what, we're always using cerebrospinal fluid, and it is something that's inherent to biological functioning of a human being, and it's also central to many spiritual practices. So as we develop a deeper scientific understanding of what cerebrospinal fluid is and what it does, we can understand spiritual practices in a more scientific way, so that we can relate our understanding of things that are presented in scientific terms back to their, say, historical or spiritual roots in various traditions. So as an example, there's a lot of different yoga and breathing practices that work on moving the cerebrospinal fluid in the body. And a lot of these you might just consider generally, perhaps Kundalini yoga is one of the most common or popular. But this concept of the energy in the spine awakening and rising up through the higher centers of the body into the brain is common to many traditions around the world. And when we understand that the basis of every religion or spiritual teaching is all centered in the self, in the individual, and the individual's manifestation of consciousness as it relates to the whole, the collective of humans or the world at large, that we understand that every practice or every tradition ultimately is still going to be about us interfacing with our body and our nervous system, especially. So the purpose of the cerebrospinal fluid essentially is to give life to the body and give life to us in a very profound way. And the cerebrospinal fluid essentially is this like central sort of loosh, this life force that is so incredibly dense, and it plays a role in the functioning of the cells of the body. And in the process of awakening or moving this cerebrospinal fluid and understanding how it moves, we can develop greater sensitivity and awareness to these more ecstatic states, or these states of deep presence or deep bliss, peace, joy, love, those sorts of things, and generally have a scientific process of awakening yourself. So as we understand the scientific perspective of cerebrospinal fluid, we can understand its role that it plays in traditions where they're not specifically talking about cerebrospinal fluid, and yet that's what these practices are doing, if that makes sense. So as an example, there are very specific breathing exercises, specifically with Kriya Yoga or different more advanced forms of yoga other than Kundalini, where there is a more gentle approach to raising this energy and directly working with the energy in the spine and understanding how our breath and our cerebrospinal fluid are connected is a very important thing. So if we understand that cerebrospinal fluid is produced in the spine, it turns over about 3 to 4 times a day, and this process of the energy rising and then falling back down again is just a natural thing that is occurring in all of us every day. And at the same time, when we have that conscious control of it, we can use it to bring our awareness to these higher centers in the brain. So there's the cerebrospinal fluid is sort of central in the spine. And if you were to describe that as something in yoga terms, you'd call that the Sushumna, or the central column of the spine. In medical terms, if you picture the medical symbol, which is a staff or rod with two snakes going around it, and then the wings, and then the central point on top, this essentially is the same representation. The caduceus is the same representation of what I have right there of the chakras. Essentially, you have the two peripheral parts of the main central nervous system moving around the Sushumna. So you have the center of the spine, and then you have the two weaving serpents in the caduceus weaving on either side, and this is called the Irda and the Pingala, or the hot and cool, or the ascending and descending peripheral channels of the central nervous system that are in the spine, and where each where the snakes make the cross, that's where each chakra is. So in this sense, when we understand that the Irda and the Pingala are also representative, at least according to Mauro Zapatera at Harvard Medical School, the Irda and the Pingala represent the pituitary and the pineal gland. And when we understand that the pituitary and the pineal are the master hormone regulators of the endocrine system, and generally regulators of the production of the essential esters and hormones in the body, we can have a deeper appreciation for the chakras and the science of yoga as it relates to modern neuroscience, and then just the practical, like, what does it mean for us in terms of why are we doing these practices, or is there a greater understanding of how the process of awakening works, and where it can be still presented in whatever setting, secular or religious or spiritual, and given its appropriate place so that we understand what we're doing and why it's happening. So this cerebrospinal fluid essentially carries vital molecules. It's like this prime life giver, and all the cells in the body are dependent on this cerebrospinal fluid. And if you were to say what is like one of the most potent fluids or life forces in the body, you would certainly say that cerebrospinal fluid might be the most potent of them all. And so as we understand, you don't want to lose cerebrospinal fluid generally, like unless like with a doctor doing something very specific. You really want to maintain this fluid in the body and regulate its flow and understand how its flow works. So there's this deepening understanding of how to bring the cerebrospinal fluid up from the base of the spine into this the third eye and generally the prefrontal cortex, this central point between the eyebrows that they call, the cave of Brahma or the Christ consciousness center. All of this is this place of awareness within us that, in neuroscience terms, it's literally just the prefrontal cortex. It's the most evolved part of the human brain, which is the most evolved brain in the universe that we know of so far. I'm sure we'll find more evolved ones perhaps at some point, but for now, this is the most evolved thing that we know of in terms of like a biological thing. So, and the cerebrospinal fluid is basically the fuel for that, if you were to think about it like that. So the process of awakening the cerebrospinal fluid and using it is essentially living in harmony with nature, living in harmony with yourself and the laws of the universe, which over time we develop a greater understanding of what that is and how to have integrity in ourselves and grow our connection or our awareness of our biological functions so that we can be of greater service to ourselves and therefore to the world. So in moving the cerebrospinal fluid, healthy diet, healthy exercise, proper sleep, all of that, like basic stuff, and is going to be nurturing for the cerebrospinal fluid. And then on top of that, in certain traditions like Ayurveda, the Indian medical science, Dr. Vasant Lad, who runs the Ayurveda Institute in New Mexico, is the first Ayurveda place outside of India. And he talks about how the herbs, the Ayurvedic herbs, can help purify the blood, help purify the nervous system, and sort of clear out any impurities. Because as the cerebrospinal fluid moves, if we have impediments or we have blockages or little knots or whatever, we can not experience the pure flow of the cerebrospinal fluid. And the cerebrospinal fluid actually, it has been measured to perceive, or at least almost create light, and to have vibration to it. And this whole it has a lot of very etheric components to it that have been measured scientifically in the lab at Harvard. And so as we understand that this is something that is new to science in many ways in terms of how people are understanding what it is, it's something that people have been experiencing for thousands of years in states of ecstatic bliss or awakening. And as we approach it from this lens, like I'm saying, we can develop a greater perspective on how to create a greater connection or greater awareness of our own biology, and then have practices that cater to that. And this already exists, like I said, in many of the ancient traditions of the world, but having the awareness come together so that generally there's the understanding, like Aldous Huxley wrote this book called The Perennial Philosophy, and it's just about all of the different rays of light of the sun, essentially, that are all manifested as these different philosophies or religions or whatever, and they all point back to the same central source. So as we sort of understand that that's what's happening with anything we do with science or spirituality, that if it's a true thing, it's all going to point back to the same source. And as we develop a greater connection and relation to that within ourselves, we can see how it manifests in the world and how we can be more connected to that flow within ourselves. So the cerebrospinal fluid has a resonant field, essentially, and the center point being in the heart. So as the heart calms down and as the breath stills, the ultimate sort of point of stillness is the state of breathlessness. And as we reach breathlessness, then the cerebrospinal fluid reaches maximum flow and essentially begins to descend from this point back into the heart. And as this high consciousness, essentially this substance of pure awareness, reaches and flows into the heart and flows into the body, that's when we experience these deeper states of bliss and perhaps what some might call samadhi. And in understanding that samadhi is essentially, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the eighth limb, or the highest state of being, that this union, the goal of yoga, the union with all, the state of oneness, that this is a real experience, a very direct experience that we all are capable of having, and it's not just for a select few, and it's just a matter of sort of demystifying a lot of the things around it so that we can have it be more accessible in modern terms. And this is why I bring this up in the first place, because cerebrospinal fluid is so central to spiritual traditions in general, but nobody talked about it before because it was virtually unknown to the ancients, or at least in terms of, it was known in terms of people knew about the brain. In ancient Egypt, they understood, like the eye of Ra, like everyone understands, like the awakening of the pineal gland, and generally just the neuroanatomy of the brain is not something that is modern, but translated, and the amount of detail that we have now is much greater. And so in recognizing that we're all here on the same planet, all trying to figure out the same thing, and we want to understand it through the same lens, science can be a really good lens for that. And that's why I bring up the cerebrospinal fluid, because it has this deep connection to so many ancient traditions, and at the same time, it's something that's just being explored and measured in the lab in a very concrete and rigorous way. So it's exciting to share something like that, where it's something that you can directly interface with yourself and get a better sense of how this energy, or how this fluid moves in your body. And by developing a greater sensitivity and awareness to that, we can find those states of bliss, peace, joy, love in our hearts and in our lives. So that's why we're here. And I'm very grateful that you are here and that you are here to share this and experience it for yourself and have your own experience. And that is it. So thank you for watching. Peace.